We're going to start with an exercise meditation called Lectio Divina. Have all of you tried Lectio, done Lectio? You know what it is? Yes, most
I
of
know
you.
what it is.
Okay.
I haven't tried it.
Haven't tried it. All right. Um, let me say this is Lectio Divina is God through words. That's the Lectio. But you can also do it through pictures. You can also do it through objects. There's a lot of different ways using art. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But it's a basics process where we go through 3 steps. So I'll have a short reading, and I will read it, and I will read it twice. And then after I read it twice, you'll be asked to look for what shimmers in it. And then we'll do it a second time, and I will ask you to ask what word or phrase stands out. And then I'll read it a third time twice, and I will ask you, do you hear an invitation to do or be something? We'll send you a copy of all the steps in this, so you don't have to worry about writing it down. But so just get comfortable in your seats. And take a few deep breaths. In through your nose, feeling that diaphragm fill up, and out through your mouth as slow as possible. Breathing in through your nose, and out through your mouth. Become aware of your body. Where your body touches surfaces, what you're sitting on, the floor, your arms, maybe on the arms of the chair, on a desk. And the feel of clothing next to your skin. And imagine the energy in your body that moves downward. And feel the energy moving downward, down your thighs and your knees and your calves, ankles, feet, until it moves into the earth, through the floor that your feet are on, through the space until it moves into the earth. And imagine it going as far into the earth as you can. The energy that moves downward, that goes down your legs, out your feet, into the earth. And now the energy that goes upward, up your backbone and your torso and your arms and your shoulders and your neck, up the back of your head and your face, until it reaches into the universe. And the upward energy that connects you with all that is above you. Become aware of your heart center. Imagine it filled with love, much bigger than the heart, the whole center of your body. And allow that energy to extend horizontally until it connects you with all living things and beings on the earth. I'm going to read this twice. And the first time we listen to this, listen to what shimmers for you as you listen to this. Listen for a word or phrase that stands out and seems to shine or shimmer. Messages from everywhere light up our backyard. A bird that flew 5,000 miles is trilling 6 bright notes. This bird flew over the mountains and valleys and tiny dolls and pencils of children I will never see. Because this bird is singing to me, I belong to the wide wind, the people far away who share the air and the clouds. Together, we are looking up into all we do not own, and we are listening. Listen to a word or phrase that shimmers for you. Messages from everywhere light up our backyard. A bird that flew 5,000 miles is trilling 6 bright notes. This bird flew over mountains and valleys and tiny dolls and pencils of children I will never see. Because this bird is singing to me, I belong to the wide wind, the people far away who share the air and the clouds. Together we are looking up into all we do not own, and we are listening. What shines or shimmers for you?
Bird flying over children that I will never meet.
Together looking out at all we do not own, and we are listening.
Light up the backyard.
A bird that flew 5,000 miles.
I will read this 2 more times and listen for a word or phrase that speaks to you from this passage. A word or phrase that speaks to you. Messages from everywhere light up our backyard. A bird that flew 5,000 miles is trilling 6 bright notes. This bird flew over mountains and valleys and tiny dolls and pencils of children I will never see. Because this bird is singing to me, I belong to the wide wind, the people far away who share the air and the clouds. Together we are looking up into all we do not own, and we are listening. A word or phrase that speaks to you from this passage.
Truly,
Messages from everywhere light up our backyard. A bird that flew 5,000 miles is trilling 6 bright notes. The bird flew over mountains and valleys and tiny dolls and pencils of children I will never see. Because this bird is singing to me, I belong to the wide wind, the people far away who share the air and the clouds. Together we are looking up into all we do not own, and we are listening. A word or phrase that speaks to you from this passage.
Because the bird is singing to me.
I belong to the wide wind.
Share the air kept sticking out to me. We, after all, do share air and water from the time the planet was made until now.
Together we are looking up into all we do not own.
Messages from everywhere. We are listening.
I belong.
And finally, I'll read it 2 more times. And this time, do you sense that this passage is inviting you to do or to be something? Is this passage inviting you to do or to be something? Is there an invitation here? Messages from everywhere light up our backyard. A bird that flew 5,000 miles is trilling 6 bright notes. This bird flew over mountains and valleys and tiny dolls and pencils of children I will never see. Because this bird is singing to me, I belong to the wide wind, the people far away who share the air and the clouds. Together we are looking up into all we do not own, and we are listening. Is this passage inviting you to do or to be something? An invitation. Messages from everywhere light up our backyard. A bird that flew 5,000 miles is trilling 6 bright notes. The bird flew over mountains and valleys and tiny dolls and pencils of children I will never see. Because this bird is singing to me, I belong to the wide wind, the people far away who share the air and the clouds. Together we are looking up into all we do not own, and we are listening. An invitation.
An invitation to connection.
To slow down, pay attention.
An invitation to expand my worldview.
An invitation to wonder whether I can send messages on the wide wind.
Leaning into interconnectedness.
It reminds me of an invitation to step out into my backyard and to hear the messages, listen to the messages.
An invitation to listen.
An invitation to invite others into my backyard so we can all share that light.
And now let's sit in silence for a moment. And I will read this one final time and just let the words wash over you. Messages from everywhere light up our backyard. A bird that flew 5,000 miles is trilling 6 bright notes. This bird flew over mountains and valleys and tiny dolls and pencils of children I will never see. Because this bird is singing to me, I belong to the wide wind, the people far away who share the air, and the clouds. Together we are looking up into all we do not own, and we are listening. Phil is going to divide you up into small groups, 2 groups of 3 and 1 of 4. And you'll have, 10 minutes to reflect on this, but there's a particular process I invite you to use. And that is that one person speaks and there's no response. And then the next person speaks and you just listen. And then the third person speaks. And in between each one, take a moment of silence. And after everyone has spoken, then share if you hear what you hear that's common that you shared in all of your responses. So one person speaks, and then there's silence. Another person speaks, and then there's silence. And the third person speaks, and then there's silence. And then sharing what you heard, you might share in common
Is there a
from
prompt?
your responses.
Is there a prompt?
No, this experience. The prompt is the poem that we just listened to.
Phil,
And
you're-
you can share anything that's in your heart.
Yeah.
You're not limited to anything that was stirred in you
Right.
from this experience.
What the experience was
And
like.
so why don't we give them 12 minutes so that everybody has at least 2 minutes to speak
Okay. All right, I'm going to
and some
open the
time for
rooms.
silence.
I'm going to open the rooms up now then. Nice poem. Who was that?
Naomi Shahab
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a little bit different than hers. Hers are.
Yeah, I was on Facebook this morning.
Oh, okay. They're usually a little more narrative for her. She's telling more of a
Yeah,
story.
they are usually. This is more Rumi-like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Even, yeah. Yeah. And so you're going to tell them when we come back a little bit more about how Lectio Divina works and
yeah, how Lectio works
in a large group.
and
Yeah.
and ways to use it and a little bit
Yeah.
about the process. I just asked them to practice.
And I believe that's in the Dropbox. We said we'd send something to them, but I think it's probably, we sent them the link to the Dropbox. So I think some Lectio.
I didn't send it to them, but
No,
we can.
Well,
Oh, it's in the
yeah, we
it's in
sent
the
them the link.
Dropbox.
Yeah,
Okay.
we sent them the
Did we?
link to the Dropbox.
This time or next time it gets linked to the
Uh,
Dropbox?
uh,
I think it's the next time it gets linked
oh,
to the
okay. Well,
Dropbox.
then maybe we should
Okay,
tell them.
but it'll be in there the
We'll
next
tell,
time they
we
get
can
this.
tell them we're
So,
going to send them a link to the Dropbox.
yeah,
And that it will
yeah,
have that in there. Yeah, we sent them the
Yep.
Fetzer thing and the Tze Yu Tze.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yep.
I'm gonna run to the restroom real quick. I set my watch too. I got
all right.
about 10 minutes to go still, but I'll be right back.
Okay.
Oh, good poem. So you just saw it this morning, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah, or yesterday. It was just
Yeah.
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 I can send it to you clearly.
Yeah,
I
great.
mean,
And also just, I mean, that is a perfect size, so you want to talk about that too.
yeah,
Like
yep.
it's anything bigger than the sonnet. A sonnet is even too much. It's too complex, I think. It's these
Yeah.
it's a shorter lyrical poem is what we're looking for to do this.
Yeah, not the whole story, just a piece of it.
Yeah, just a moment
Because
or
then
two.
yeah, just a moment of it.
Yeah, she's great. She's great. Love her, and that surprises me that that is her because usually she's telling some sort of story.
Yeah, like I said, usually she's telling a story, but Naomi Shihab Nye calls Messages from Everywhere.
Yeah, I
But
love
it is more like Rumi. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the title. Yeah. Okay, got it. Thank you. I'm gonna close my
Okay.
Outlook so it doesn't ding
Um,
on me. Yeah. So, I whenever we do this, like I was super tired this morning, and then I'm all pepped up and jazzed now.
I was too this afternoon because
Yeah.
it's late.
You know,
And I got a full day and a full week, but still.
and I'm an extrovert, but I think it is people, this is different than like going to a congregation with a bunch of grumpy people who want to complain at you. This is like they're really engaged, and
Yeah.
I mean they weren't shy about sharing their words and yeah. So this is excellent. So
But they did what people usually do. They don't leave the silence. They fill
no,
the silence as soon as possible.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this could be a good place. This, I don't know if a bell would work here or not. I mean, I could see finishing the poem, and then take in a few breaths and
Well,
then
you can invite them to spend a minute and then we'll ring the bell and let you
yeah,
know when the silence is
yeah.
over if you want to,
Because
if you want to do it
yeah,
that way.
yeah, because it is a indication of the people's experience with this by how quickly they jump in, you
Mhm.
know. which is fine. I mean, it means they're engaged, and that's great. But
Yes, and they're listening. Yes.
yeah.
Yep,
Oh,
yep.
by the way, too, I am gonna mention Marcia McPhee's book, since we're talking about teams. This book.
Okay. Yeah.
It's pretty, it's
Good.
pretty Christian, although she's a Methodist, so it's not, not Great Commission Christian.
Not too orthodox.
Yeah, it's it's just standard.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just love, I mean, what she's doing, we're talking about the themes, we're talking about the practices, and then this is how to really make those themes and practices come alive. We're giving them some ideas, but this is just full of ideas on how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, introducing parts of the liturgy with familiar refrains, Did you do that recently too, with having people sing things repeatedly, or? Interesting.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
a loving kindness meditation.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. I know you mentioned that. Yeah. And so that, she's talking about these as how to, just kind of expand on the worship elements and make them more participatory, because she does believe in interactive worship, but they're not spiritual practice oriented, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? She's creatively, artistically expanding them, I think, in a great way. And I think that's worth doing in worship all the time. But they are good ideas about how to expand things spiritually too, for
Yeah.
spiritual deepening. So singing a refrain, certainly. So, but yeah. And then she does talk about seasonal planning. She has a really good plan to, that like August or whatever. Oh, too bad Jacqueline's not here, because she talks about in the interview how they do their planning. They do the first,
Yeah, she said August and January. Yeah.
first half of
Yeah.
the year, and then in the next, yeah. So, that's a really good tip there. And that's totally Marcia McPhee's sort of thing, And then the idea that this is your spiritual practice. I don't know if she actually says it, but I mean, this is your spiritual practice, putting together these.
Yeah, creating the worship. Yeah.
And supporting each other as you do it, as your spiritual practice. So,
Mhm.
Let me see how. I got about 3.5 minutes to go, and that was actually, I gave him 13 minutes because I didn't have an automatic 12-minute setting on my watch.
But you have a 13-minute setting?
Yeah, I don't know why. So I tell you what, I'll give him
2-minute warning.
I'll give him a 2-minute warning now, which is
Yeah.
and then we'll close the rooms, and they'll get that one extra
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah.
There we go. 2 minutes. So what I would like to emphasize too, just kind of coming out of this, is my simple way of looking at this is just take what you're already doing a service and make it a spiritual practice. And so this is like replacing the reading or the litany,
Yep.
You're
Or the
opening it up.
responsive reading, or
You're
yeah.
opening
Yeah.
it up. And you're taking something that you might have got done in 2 or 3 minutes, and it's taking a chunk of time. It's taking 10 or 15 minutes.
Mhm, mhm.
And that's what's different about doing this. So if we could mention that, if you don't do it, I will.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's the easy thing, is, take those elements, look at it from a communal spiritual perspective, and
Yeah.
you can't do all of them, or you'd have a service last forever, but choose the ones that work best with the theme for you.
Yeah.
So it might be Lectio, it might be singing meditation, it might be an embodied sort of thing you're asking them to do, and vary it. And I like the idea too of introducing these things sprinkled out throughout the year, so they get practice doing it, and then you have it featured in the spiritual deepening service.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah,
Trying to bring them back.
25 seconds.
Okay.
Very precise. I'm a J after all.
After all, we all need to have a J in our life to get us organized.
So they
I'm
get
married to one.
yeah.
He
Oh,
gets
yeah.
up with a plan in the morning.
Oh, a plan for the day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Close all rooms. Let's see how long it takes to get here, because that's the indication of how
54 seconds. So
how
close.
engaged they are.
Yeah.
Okay, they're talking.
Well, I'm sure they are. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, well let's unpack this for them as a demo, of just
Hmm.
and now I just realized too, this would be a great thing to do in your planning groups, just to spend the first 20 minutes to practice Lectio together.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you really know how to do it. You
Yep.
experience as a communal spiritual practice. So oh my goodness.
They're not bad at all.
Wow. Wow.
There they are. Got kicked out.
Woof. I know. You do know the test of how well it went is when you don't come back from your rooms right away. It's like you keep talking. And I think that's also just a good indication of how rich Lectio Divina can be, because you've got that one thing in the center that you're all kind of engaged with, and then we have all of our responses and all of our experiences of it, and then the sharing of those is really, that's the communal spiritual practice, because we're learning more about each other. We're learning more about the poem, actually, if somebody lifts something else up that we might have not have heard, and it's just something we're doing together. That's really an opportunity to go deeper into something. So Sue, what do you want to say about
The poem,
Lectio?
by the way, is by Naomi Shihab Nye.
Anybody acquainted with
It's
her
called
work?
Messages from Everywhere.
Yeah. I told Sue that kind of surprised me, because hers are usually narrative. She's got more of a story going with maybe some people interacting, but this was more meditative, just kind of here, in the environment, and just letting
Rumi like.
Rumi like, yes. Yeah, she has her first
Yeah.
her first image that kind of makes the rest of the poem go.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Sue.
First, in terms of beginning to unpack this, I always keep a clock with a second hand within eye view, whether I'm doing this online, because I can time the silences and make sure that they're the same amount of time in between. And I also do it when I'm leading from the pulpit, have something with a second hand on it. So I can, again, time the silences. So I know that we've gone 2 or 3 minutes of silence with people. And a bell, if you have one. Sometimes it helps people to know when the silence ends. They know to listen for the bell. I can ring this here, but you probably won't hear it because I've got the background noise turned off. But a bell, to have that. One of my pet peeves are those bells that people don't know how to use, those chimes. They get
There's
up
a
there and
trick.
they use them and they kind
There's
of
a
go
trick to
clank.
that.
So
There's a trick
make
to that.
sure you know how to use whatever you're using in terms of to let
Yeah.
the silence go. And with introducing a spiritual practice into worship, introduce it into a regular slot that you do on a regular basis. So don't add something more to the service, but instead of a responsive reading or a reading, introduce Lectio. I knew a minister that did it with a hymn. After each verse of the hymn, they had 2 minutes of silence and thought about what shimmered, what stood out, what where the invitation was. So there's ways to introduce it into worship, but do it in the context of the elements that people already know, so that it's not something that's sprung from nowhere that
Right.
they're trying to get a grip on. But also practice it with your worship team when you meet. Have someone lead a lectio for the group. It can be just a paragraph. I mean, it needs to be short. That was about perfect length, that poem.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be any longer than that, because your mind kind of wanders off trying to follow whatever it is you're following. But something very short can be part of a poem, can be a verse of a poem, can be lyrics, music lyrics.
Yeah.
Typically it was done with scripture, and you can do it with scripture, or what you would consider scripture. You might have other things that you consider scripture. So it can be practiced that way. It's a fairly straightforward thing for people to learn. I did a new members class where we were looking at the principles, and I started each one with a lectio that was reflective of a particular principle. And these people then spent a few minutes unpacking how that moved them. And then there was a reflection on the principle. So it's a way of kind of leading people into deeper spaces.
Yeah. And so the length too, and Sue, I think we should talk about where you find your poems too, because you get riches of poems coming at you every day. But the length, it's a short lyric poem for the most part. This is what this was, it was very short, did not have a lot going on in it other than imagery and some beautiful language, and that's really what a lyric poem is about. That's why the Coleman Barks translations of Rumi are so popular. They're just about the right size, they start with an idea and follow all the way through. If sonnets are too complex because they usually do this little turn in the middle, and you got to be thinking about it. And you want a poem where people aren't actually thinking too hard about it. They're letting that imagery go, and so many of you responded with some of those beautiful images that Naomi Shahi and I put in there. So just think about, collect them if you can. But Sue, like I said, she has riches of poems coming into her inbox every day. So maybe you just talk about some of them.
There's
and maybe we can get
lots
a
of sources of poetry. Again, spirituality and practice and worship web and all of those pieces that we gave you. Almost all the in the UU hymn book, almost all of the opening words and closing words, any of those, because they're very short pieces, could be used for lectio.
Worship web on the
So it's
website might have some short pieces.
Yeah, worship web. So it's and I mean there's a lot of sources of poetry. I do get it. This one I found on Facebook. It popped up today in the feed from that I was going, was going through. So so they
I just want to say, I would say trust yourself. I mean, if you read something and go, this would be good lectio. Yes, it would be. Don't doubt it. I mean, save it and put it in have a file of lectio poems, because Sue, you read it, right? And said, hey, we'll use this today because it just had all the qualities.
It had the elements. Yeah. And it's also not, it doesn't have triggers in it. You're not using words that might trigger people and send them into the woods. Any kind of religious language that might do that. So that's another thing to watch out for. But we're talking about how to make worship services have more spiritual depth to them. And what we mean by that is, how do you do things that open people's heart? And not talking to just their mind. So how is that? What are those pieces? And one piece is a teaching story. We do stories for all ages. They're often teaching stories, but those kinds of things will begin to get people to think in different ways. And it's not for children, and don't call them up front. Just the stories for everybody, to get them to begin to think about it. One that we use all the time is that passage from Velveteen Rabbit. I mean, that's a teaching story that's used all the time with people. Last Sunday I used Sandy Sasso's The God in Between. I was teaching about pluralism, so I use that as the teaching story.
And Sandy Sasso's
Um,
a rabbi, right?
Rabbi, yeah.
Yeah. And she
Um,
writes.
music is another way. Music, the singing opens the heart, but chanting, you have to sing it 7 times, not 3, but 7 times. That begins to drop people into it. You should have seen the organist when I said, "Oh, we're singing this
Yeah.
7 times."
A minimum of 7 times. I mean, yeah.
7 times. And you can, I mean, I started with Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. Not Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. Come, Come, Whoever You Are last week. And instead of an opening hymn, we sang that 7 times as a way of beginning the service. So, so that's another way to kind of bring that kind of Taizé chanting element into a service. Silence, of course. We often have prayers and a minute of silence and kind of rush on with it. But we use it now at instead of doing a 20-minute sermon, 3 6-minute segments. One of them will be the teaching story. And when it's finished, there's 2 minutes of silence. You've got to give your introverts time to catch up, because they're sitting with a story and we go on to something else and they haven't quite absorbed that. But just give people time to kind of sink into whatever it is. And sometimes you leave them with a prompt, with a question. But just to end with silence before you move on to the next part of the service. But making it an integral part of the service, as opposed to there'll be a few minutes of silence. It's at the end of the prayer and before the hymn. And time it.
Yeah. I just want to ask about
Give them
this
a
kind of-
minimum of 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and gradually increase it.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be like directive, what you're asking people to do in the silence.
Mhm.
You know, just a little hint about what, because I actually have had people say to me when I try to do some silence, like, what am I supposed to do? You know, if you're giving
am
them
I
a
supposed
longer
to do?
silence than they're used to, they don't know what to do. So, you know, you can give them a few prompts, you know, and just, you know, you could, you know, kind of like maybe the Lectio Divina thing, you know, just, you know, consider your experience here.
Or end with a question. You know, it's just I was doing pluralism last week, and I did inner pluralism with ancestors, saints, and angels. So at the end of the section on ancestors, it was like, who are your ancestors? And I had given people little origami sheets and things to write with, so that they could write the names of their ancestors. And they did the same with the saints and the angels on the piece of paper. And then at the end of the service, everyone came up and put them on a table, where I had lit a candle and put them around on the table, so that they could see how many beings were actually in that room with us, and what our own diversity and pluralism was. The point of having people write it down is that then they remember it. You know, if you've written it down, you remember it.
Yeah, and that's
but-
also bringing some embodied elements too.
Yes, and getting people to up and move. Now they're if I'd had a different setup, I would have had different cutouts and maybe had a branch that people hung them on, or maybe drawn a tree and had people put sticky things on the tree. But I didn't have that kind of setup there that I could do that where I was. I knew I had a table. I said, okay, give me a white tablecloth on the table so people can see these things, and a candle. So that's what we used. So it didn't require a lot of extra gathering of stuff. And so the sermon on pluralism was actually 3 6-minute sections. The teaching story, one on ancestors, one on saints and angels. So it was divided up that way. I have done a 20-minute loving kindness meditation instead of a service in the middle of the service, and had them sing the response, "May I be filled with loving kindness." It's in our hymnal. 7 times after each one of the moves, you know, and you start with seeing someone you love in front of you and singing it to them, and seeing someone that's an acquaintance, and you keep moving it, upping the ante essentially
Yeah.
until you're singing it to yourself.
Yeah.
But and you, it was amazing that people came up to me at the end of the service and said, well, I had the hardest time doing this. I had the hardest time doing this. I couldn't believe I could do this. So and no one missed the fact that they didn't get a sermon, because the sermon was that singing of the doing the loving kindness meditation.
Yeah.
So there's ways to ritual, some kind of metaphor ritual that you introduce into a service, where people can, having people turn to talk to one another, having them make something. My husband gave them kazoos at the end of the service to take away. So so think about items that again embody whatever it is that you're talking about, or quality or topic that you're exploring, however you want to embody it.
Did he have him make a joyful noise with a kazoo?
I don't remember
Okay,
what the context was. I just remember I ordered the kazoos on Amazon.
Oh, you ordered them. You were the purveyor. Yeah.
Babs has an
Oh,
interesting question.
it was on it was a sermon on, does God have a sense of humor?
Oh, because
The fact that there's very little in the Bible about sense of humor or laughter. Yes, so
yeah,
that's what it was. That's what the
so
focus was on.
Babs
So there's
has a
lots of ways you
question
can.
in the chat. Okay.
Yeah, Babs has a question in the chat,
okay,
but we'll let Sue finish before we get to it.
So there's a lot of things you can introduce in various ways into the service. The main thing is to practice them. Be comfortable. If you're comfortable with the silence, everybody else will be comfortable with the silence. Because you become the container. Essentially, you're holding all of that for people. You can do it online. I learned that because during the pandemic, I led meditations 5 days a week for 18 months, from 12 to 1 every day, online. And I was one that wasn't convinced you could do it that way. But then I realized, energy doesn't stay within walls. If you begin to be connected with people that are all focused on the same thing, you can do it in a way that transcends the physical space that they're in. So it can be just as connecting that way.
Yeah, or more
you
so.
have a you have a piece from Fetzer on creating sacred space online, which came out, I guess, right at the beginning of the pandemic. But it's a way, if you're doing online worship, it's a way of bringing those elements into that online community. I had my online people on Sunday put their ancestors, angels, and saints in the chat so that they could share that with one another.
Yeah, and I'll say with that too, you need an online worship leader as well. You need somebody monitoring what's happening online that is trained to be doing the worship with you, because you want to have both experiences be valid. And I think you can have valid experiences, spiritual experiences online, like Sue was saying, silence. I've had people tell me that they thought the silence was deeper because here we were all around the country or whatever, sharing the silence across, time and space. So, but yeah, don't try to be the worship leader for the in-person people and trying to handle the online people too. You're going to really need to make sure, you have a plan for that, because you want to have a good experience, whether you're in person or online. So
we have someone that monitors the online people in the chapel with us, and also two people online that do. And so when we do joys and sorrows, they put theirs in the chat, and someone gets up and reads them so that the candles can be lit.
Yeah.
So there's a way of and at the end of every service, whoever led the service sits down with the online people before you go to coffee hour to chat with them, so that they feel connected that way to whatever happened in the service. So these practices, and you have a paper that we sent on
So hey, before we
What's it
move on to
called,
that,
Bill?
can we just take a look at Bab's question though? Because it's a good question.
Yes, yes. Well, that's what I was going to address that with the,
It's the use of religious language, you know, and
language.
you know, and being aware of
I don't
trauma.
believe in I don't believe in never using it, but I think you've got to introduce it gradually.
Hmm.
I don't think you can suddenly switch into a full theistic or all God type of language when you haven't done it. So to gradually introduce it is a way that kind of invites people in, and also you can also acknowledge the trauma
Mhm,
with the religious language and help people with that
mhm.
in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I will use a lot of different words. There's a Nancy Schaefer poem that I used last week. If I can find it again. It's about names for God,
Mhm.
and it's a really powerful piece.
Yeah. And
Um,
and while you're looking, Sue, I'll mention, you know, uh, I always, I'm always impressed when, and it's usually a minister because they're kind of using their authority, you know, their ministerial presence to kind of just name some alternative languages for a specific, maybe religious concept, but they do it in a way that's very gentle. You know what I mean? And I think that's being attentive to the trauma part, you know?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. This is just my own little
Oh,
tangential thing here. Like,
sure, sure.
I feel like we shy away in
Yeah.
our congregation. I'm just going to speak for the group that I
Mm-hmm.
am a part of. I feel like we shy away from a lot
Yeah.
of languaging or even mentioning
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
deity of almost any kind.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly anything Christian based.
Sure.
yeah,
Um,
Yeah.
because and I don't know, this is just my own personal opinion, and if anybody would like to talk about this outside of this, I would love that. Thank you. I don't want to take
Sure.
up our time.
Yeah.
the Nancy Schaefer poem is "That Which Holds All," um, and it starts with, because she wanted everyone to feel included in her prayer, she said right at the beginning several names for the holy. Thinking these weren't enough, she and it could not be fully addressed. She added particularities, saying, and it goes on to saying, other people began to offer names. So she just basically leads people through um, different names for God.
If I
But the
can,
poem is called "That Which Holds All."
I've got a
And
copy of it here.
that's by Nancy Schaefer.
Nancy Schaefer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I found it.
Joel.
I'll pop it in
if,
for you.
if I can piggyback on this conversation with an alternative strategy, I think it's fairly common to offer synonyms and alternatives. I've
Mm-hmm.
taken a different approach, which is to take that word and universalize the concept. Because oftentimes the objections people have is because they're thinking of that term in a certain fundamental context.
Mm-hmm.
And if you point out that actually that's just a definition of the word,
Mm-hmm.
there are in fact 10 definitions of the word, or two, one specific and one universal,
Yeah.
right? We can embrace the universal and use it. When I use it in this context, it means that. It doesn't mean the thing you think it means.
Thank you, Joel. And Todd has his hand up.
Todd.
Yes, thank you. This is piggybacking on kind of what Bab said. In the supplemental resources you sent out for this week, there was a really neat book called Practicing Our Faith, and it had a study guide, and it just amazing practices, but the language, it was clearly, it's very, so I wondered if you
Christian.
could,
Yeah.
What,
exactly.
you know, and if we can, yeah, Babs, I hope we've, you know, addressed this a little bit, and then, but this is where Sue is just about to go, Todd. I think, right, Sue? We were
Yeah, this is where I was
talking about that, and thank you for
one
bringing
of
that
the
up.
things she says about the practices is that each practice involves us in God or Spirit's activities in the world and reflects the grace and love. It's a complex set of acts, words, and images that address one area of fundamental human need. It's learned with and from other people. It comes to us from the past and will be shaped by us for the future. It's thoughtful. It implies certain beliefs about ourselves, our neighbors, and spirit. It's done within the church, in the public realm, in daily work, and at home. It shapes the people who participate in the practice individually and communally. It has good purposes, although it often becomes corrupted. And it comes to a focus in worship. And so the practices you're talking about, that she talks about, are things like hospitality. We all practice hospitality, but if you think of hospitality as a spiritual practice, how do you imbue it then? How do you see it as you're welcoming people to the community? So I think that the even though there are Christian practices in there, Todd, I think we can take what Joel said about them and universalize the practice that they're talking about. Because she is, I mean, she's a progressive Christian. And this is where a lot of this literature is found within that network. But a lot of it is then opened up for others to use in a different way.
Yeah. So can I pop in about spirituality and practice
Yes.
just to
Yep.
take a look at it, because it is a more interfaith approach to practices. And we didn't actually take a look at these last week, but I want to just kind of show you what you get with spirituality and practice. I have an ulterior motive to do this. So what you get with spirituality and practice is a basic practice, and these are just things like beauty here, and it enhances simplicity, pleasure, and it balances or counters clutter, habitual life. So it has a reason to look at this practice. So they always talk about the basic practice, and here they're mentioning a Navajo blessing. So it's not, just a Christian approach, but it's a more interfaith one. And it has some things like these daily cues and reminders to be looking at. So they have their about 26 or more practices that they have. And then over here on the right-hand side, you'll get things like excerpts from teaching stories, so this is a place to come and find those teaching stories, things like that. They have lots of great quotes, book excerpts, prayers and mantras. And then I just wanted to show this off. They also have what they call program plans. And I actually wrote these. So
Yes.
so they have these could be small group plans that you're doing. And what I wanted to show you is that at the end of each one, there is, to practice this thought, describe the most surprisingly beautiful thing you have seen today. And so I think these are the kind of things we want to do with the spiritual deepening through worship, is be having people leave with something, some practice they can take with them. And I think that's a big point of talking about these as practices, is what we're doing. What we're doing in worship is, especially if we've been talking about the theme for a while, is we're encouraging people to approach the theme with practices in mind and actually engaging in the theme, and that's what those practices are. So I like what's in the Bass stuff about the Christian aspect, but it is way too Christian for me too. In fact, I kind of chuckle, like they call them Christian practices. Well, isn't hospitality just kind of a universal practice?
Honoring the body, isn't that a universal practice?
Isn't that kind of a universal?
I mean, she puts them in a Christian context, but the things that she lists are things that we can think about in terms of how those are practices that within our communities. How are we using them?
Right. And I think
she has times of yearning, practices of faith, honoring the body, hospitality, household economics, saying yes and saying no, keeping the Sabbath, testimony, discernment, shaping communities, forgiveness, healing, and dying well. So those are the 12, and she adds singing and growing in the presence of faith. But those are the practices she sees that shape a Christian community. But those can be the practices that can shape a Unitarian community too. The way we do them is what tells people that they're Unitarian as opposed to Christian. She's
Right.
not talking about sacraments. I mean, she's not talking about marriage and baptism and communion and all of those things. She's talking about the practices that form and hold the faith community together.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the she? I didn't catch the name.
Dorothy Bass.
Thank you.
Dorothy Bass.
Right.
It's called Practicing Faith. Again, she put it up online. It's all free. The tree of practices, Phil, you have
Okay,
that.
sure. Yeah,
Um,
this is something we ran across a few years ago, that we thought was, well, actually we ran across it a while ago, but it just seems so useful when we're talking about practices. And we sent you a link for it, and it was a bad link, so I'm going to send you another link for it too if you didn't get a chance to take a look at it. But this is something that is it Maria Durr, I think is her name, something like that. It came up with to look at the various contemplative practices, they call it. But, you know, if you look at these, there are things in here that we're talking about to do like in a seasonal sort of worshipful sort of way. So right away, there's this ritual cyclical part of it. You know, things that recur every year. There's stillness, there's silence, there's centering, there's meditation, there's creative things, music and singing, visualization, journaling. They include social witness sort of things, opportunities for storytelling, deep listening, some physical movement sort of things. So what we like about this is it just really broadens the idea of what practices can be. And so if you're thinking about a theme for a worship service, what are some of the practices that can happen during that time? And then what are some practices that people can take with them, you know, in response to it as well? So I'm going to get you the better link for that, and I'll send that next week.
well, and it's also getting people to touch on what is their spiritual practice in the conversation about what's a spiritual practice, or what are your spiritual practices. If you were to identify, most, you know, and not all of us sit in silence for 20 minutes twice a day. I mean, that's it. But we do a lot of things that are spiritual practices that we haven't really labeled as such, and I think that helps to hold that up. It helps with the language too, for people to recognize the spiritual practices. There are times, mine used to be playing with my cats. Because that was one time I was in pure joy. I wasn't thinking about anything else. I was just playing with the cats. Music is sometimes one, because listening to music, you can't be anything but present. You know, you're not in front of yourself or behind yourself. You're just with the music.
Yeah.
Walking in nature, forest bathing has become very popular with some folks, of just walking silently in nature. But encouraging people to look at what spiritual practices they already have in their life and to recognize those, so that you can bring some of that into the worship as a shared spiritual practice.
Yeah, thank you, Joel, to put in a link to Everyday Spiritual Practice. There's a couple UU books on spiritual practice if you're looking for some resources that are specifically Unitarian Universalist. There's also Faithful Practices too, I think, Joel. That's the new one. Came out a few years ago. Yeah, actually, this book, Everyday Spiritual Practice, is the one that got me thinking, you know, what can we do in Unitarian Universalism to deepen spirituality? It came out at the end of the 20th century, 1999, right under the wire, you know. But it really, to me, it kind of just made it okay to talk about spirituality and spiritual practices in UU circles.
So, you know, as you think about what your themes might be for the year, and then curating a packet, you can include in that packet spiritual practices of ways, or readings for people to do Lectio. You can give them, I mean, I've noticed that Spirituality in Practice now, not Spirituality in Practice, Soul Matters now has their page of short readings, but they invite people to do Lectio with it.
Yay!
They don't say it's Lectio. They say look for what shimmers, look for what stands out, look for the invitation. But it's so that some of those are being integrated in there. But you can, as you create a packet or whatever you want to create for people to go deeper on the particular theme, you can include these spiritual elements, and then you can use some of them in worship so that they recognize them.
And I just want to mention, I'm going to send all the links, on Monday or Tuesday for you. So don't worry if you miss anything here. Yeah, Sue, I'm so glad to hear that. I haven't seen a Soul Matters packet recently. So they're having more short readings that you could use for your Lectio.
Yeah. And when I've done my small group following the topic, I've taken those readings and I've had people look at them and really see which one calls to them. And to do that, to do in silence the Lectio with that particular reading, and then as a group to share what reading spoke to them and how it spoke to them, so that we hear from each person. And rarely there's so many readings there, rarely do people pick the same one. Sometimes, but not very often. Not that it matters, because it speaks to them differently, but there's a way of using those. You could use those in worship by just putting them in orders of service. If you give people orders of service, just putting a particular reading or short piece in an order of service and ask them to reflect on that as Lectio. So you wanted to show them the Marcia McPhee book, Phil.
Oh yeah. I'll put a link in for this too. This is literally oldie but goodies. I think it's came out in 2002, but it's from Marcia McPhee. It's called the Worship Workshop, and Marcia McPhee is a Methodist, and oftentimes at big Methodist conventions, she'll be the person who put the worship together because she is their worship guru. She comes out of the arts dance. She says she used to dance with Dave Brubeck's group, So she comes at it with a very visual, embodied way of approaching worship. But what I really like about this is she talks about how to put together the kind of groups we're envisioning, where you're planning the worship for half the year or the whole year or something like that. So she has a section in here on seasonal worship. And that interview I did with Jacqueline Brett, which I sent you the link for, Jacqueline talks about how she works. Now, she's in a big church. She has a staff that she works with, but they plan their, fall services in August, and they plan the rest of the year in January. So a couple times that's what they're doing. And Marcia McPhee is very much into that, this is why we like coming up with themes throughout the year too, is because you sit down and you say, okay, here are the themes we're going to do this fall, and you do them kind of as a package with your worship team. And you can even be asking for, input from other folks in the congregation, saying here are the themes we're going to be exploring, quarterly or seasonally or once a month, whatever you kind of work out your liturgical year to be. And you just ask people for, what are their thoughts about this theme? What are some poems they might know about them? What are some stories they might have? Or, so it's a way to engage the whole congregation too. So that's in here. She is a Christian. I mentioned a Methodist, but it's pretty mainstream Christianity. It's not the give you shivers kind of like, would you quit talking that way Christianity. Well, the ones where they keep talking about souls for Christ, they're out getting more souls for Christ. It's like, no, we're just trying to build community, and we're just trying to give a little respite for people, and we're just trying to open our hearts up. So Sue's got
can you see this
here. Yeah,
did it come up? We talked about the lectionary, And this is how the Christian electionary works. So, and they're the ones that started it, essentially. The first half of the year is seasonal. They identify the seasons. It's the story of Jesus: Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, Pentecost. And then there are the themes: anticipation, incarnation, revelation, crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. The second half of the year is the story of the people of God. And that's the church's story. And that's what they call ordinary time. But that's the way that they will decide what the themes are, what stories are told, and how they tell it. This is a wheel I got from an Episcopal friend of mine. So so if you think of creating your own wheel with the months around it, what would be the key themes and stories? Certainly wouldn't end up looking like this, but it can have that same sense. Take this diagram and erase everything except the month names there, and think about how you might do the wheel of the year with themes that you would repeat year after year with different slants on different themes.
Right.
So I'm going to I'm not going to leave the meeting. Stop the share.
Yeah, and the way I kind of look at that too is if you kind of know the story you're trying to tell, or it has a flow, you could have like different themes at the same during the year that are a different approach to the story you're trying to tell. But the idea is kind of having that cyclical sort of thing that recurs throughout the year, which I have to say, I don't really have any complaints about touchstones or soul matters, other than it's just one continuous strand of themes. It's not ordered in any sort of way, and it's not attached to any kind of seasonal things. It is kind of, they do include the seasonal things in the packet, but they might be doing something in December, and they'll find some resources that have to do with Christmas or the
Well, and
solstice or
they're
something
missing
like
the theological themes, and I
Oh,
think
yes,
that's what Jean and I found, and probably some of you did. What are the theological themes that run throughout the year that we want to highlight? And some of the packets might be part of those theological themes and qualities that we want to emphasize. But there isn't a theological framework around the themes that they're giving for the year.
Yeah.
The good news is that once you subscribe to it, you get access to all the packets so that you can pick your own
That's
and
the way to
create
do
your
it.
own
Yeah.
theological themes using various different packets that they have that give you that information that you can curate then into your own packet. But what's your theological year? What story are you trying to tell about who you are, where you came from, where you're going? And especially now when we're going into this unknown future, there's a lot of the stuff I read that's coming out is that we don't know where the church is going to be in 10 years. We have no idea because of the falling numbers and the numbers of people churches that are closing, the numbers of clergy that are leaving. And I'm not talking about just UUs, I'm talking across the board. So it's, but different other things are popping up. Things like the sanctuary group, and we're going to hear from the people at Nourish UU, how they do dinner church. There's different house churches. There's different ways of expressing this that are popping up. So it's how are we going to evolve as a faith community, particularly since people are coming to church because it's because of their trauma, the trauma of the times that we're living in. They're looking for comfort. They're looking for community, consolation. They're looking for making sense of it. But we're really living in a time where people have been deeply traumatized by the pandemic, by the 3 years of that, the before and after, and the 2 years of isolation. by the
Climate
by the
change.
politics of the world, and it isn't just the United States; it's going on everywhere. I mean, this right, especially the rightward swing, the the increased nationalism.
Right.
You know, it so and so they're worried. Young people aren't having children. They don't want to bring children into this world. What does that say?
Yeah.
So it needs, they need the church. I mean, the
Yeah.
church is the one place, that kind of community, where they can bring all of this and be heard and listen to other people and try and sit with it, sit
Mhm.
with whatever it is that's coming up to see what emerges, because we
Yeah.
can't solve the problem.
And
So, I mean, so I think that's why it's so important what we're doing,
right.
and that in the smaller churches, um, we actually have a better way of doing it, because we're already, the larger churches have to figure out how to be smaller churches. They're a community of communities. The
Mhm.
larger churches need to figure out how to do small groups within the larger churches. Being in the smaller churches, we've got the opportunity to practice it now
Mhm.
with the people that we have there,
Mhm.
and inviting others in to join us.
Yeah. And I would say too,
So,
yeah, I think ideally, that's what these special services are for me, is like they are a place for respite, not like Sue, one of the articles we shared was "We are not the news," right? I mean, there are
That was a
times to be
good article.
yeah, there are times to be preaching about the current events, but we also need these spaces where we're just being together. And that the purpose of this spiritual deepening is it's what is it called? Care for the soul, I mean, it's just
yeah,
caring for people's spirits,
care,
right?
not cure.
Care,
Yes.
not cure. We're not trying to fix the world. We're not trying to fix you. We're just making the space where we can be present with one another, and have some experiences that bring us closer together, and also bring us closer to, what do we want to call it, the interdependent web, or transcending mystery and wonder, or whatever language we have, and to do it together, because that's what, religious community is about. So it's a healing opportunity as well. And I think, Sue, we had some stuff about spiritual
Yeah.
healing for trauma too.
Well, and Audrey posted, maybe we should have 12 values so we can fill the year with value-based
Yeah,
content. Well, we've got 7,
add some more.
in terms of the Article 2,
Mix them
there's
together.
7 of
Yeah.
them there.
Well, and I'll take,
Knit them together.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can take the 7
Add
principles
3
and break them
more.
down. Yeah, break them down to values, mix in some of the Article 2 stuff, come up with 12, and that's great. Do them every year, I love that idea. And that's what we're encouraging, what's resonating with you and what's resonating with your community. And if you're doing this as a team, what's going to work with you. And but that's a great idea. It is. So, but people need this. They really do. I was just, I've got kind of hooked on this isolation thing, but that's an issue both for teenagers and for seniors, right? We got like the gamut here, right? Everybody is suffering from loneliness and isolation at some level, even even if it's like kind of spiritual, moral isolation, like you don't feel like you fit, in this society or whatever it might be. So that's what these themes could be for, to help really, people feel like this is a place where I can be myself. And I think any good value has space for, like, beauty, right? I showed you the one from Spirituality and Practice, right? We all have a different sense of beauty. We all, are moved by beauty in different ways, but can we get together and acknowledge that this is something meaningful in our lives together? And create beauty for one another, right? So it's the same thing with all hospitality, whatever it is. Can we practice these things and embody them and make them real in people's lives? And I think that's what people want.
So
And
if we said, we said the theme is honoring the body, and we're going to hear for the month, and we're going to hear from 4 different people. You're going to hear 4 different reflections on how they conceive of honoring the body. And that will expand it and deepen it for everyone that's listening.
Mhm.
because we have one way we think of, and then suddenly you're listening to other voices and other ways, other stories, you know, the teaching story they'll bring in about what it means to honor the body, or hospitality, what it means, what hospitality means. You know, so those kinds of values being brought in, and really holding up how we as a community practice them.
Yeah.
So thoughts, we can take a few minutes of what people's heard, what's spinning in your heads. I know we've overwhelmed you with information. We have recorded this. You can get the audio or the video and watch it again or watch part of it. If you need information on other things, let us know and we'll see what we can find for you. Next week will be small groups and you'll get a lot of information. I've got a folder folder in my Dropbox on small group models, and there's like 25 of them in there. So, so you find a lot of different ways to explore it. So,
and you know, that's part of the vision. I just where that small group kind of stuff fits is rather than just doing a service. Let's say, you know, my vision is every six weeks. So rather than just doing that service and that's it, you have some preparation for the service around the theme by having some small groups, or maybe afterwards you have some small groups for people to reflect on. So we're going to talk about how you put together those small groups and the kind of things you do, and you we come at it from spiritual direction. So basically doing that as group spiritual direction.
So thoughts,
questions, comments?
Well, thank you for sending the book on spirituality. I've always been convinced that people come to church because they want to leave feeling spiritually satisfied to some degree. And I know that we struggle oftentimes in Unitarian circles to not want to offend anybody, or so that we sometimes our sermons can sound like a classroom lecture. And so
we aren't
I know
the only ones that do that, Brian.
Yeah.
It's not just a Unitarian disease.
So I'm glad we're talking about this, because I think there's a way to integrate, especially with some of the things that book was talking about in terms of spirituality is not defined, and that's the positive side of it. And so I'm looking forward to ways that we can incorporate some of this where they don't feel like they're being preached to by any sense, or that they're being told that they have to believe a certain thing, but that they can walk away with this sense of community, maybe, or spiritual comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And that's what we're trying to do.
It helps to have people walk away with something to do, like Phil's thing on beauty. What do you know? Each day, notice something beautiful in your life. That helps kind of ground that at, you know, when you finish a service, to have given people a little task to take away.
Yeah. Yeah. So Sue, do you want to I saw you put it on Facebook, but maybe we can send it to him, your link to the service you did last week.
Yeah, I can send that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that. So that's where Sue did the service where she broke it up and she asked about the angels and the ancestors, and then she had them do and with the small congregation of people who are probably very used to having sermons aimed at their head. And so it's kind of the disrupting, right? But just kind of disrupting that. But people, they engage in it, and they, like you're saying, Brian, they leave with that feeling of somehow having been, you know, spiritually fed or something like that, and they may not know that's what's happening, but it is. So, you know, so Sue, if you could,
you know, and I invited people to bring their pieces of paper with the names of their angel saints and ancestors forward and put them on the altar with the candle, and I'm standing there thinking, is anybody going to come up? And all of a sudden, everybody's there. And the table is absolutely covered. There's no room to put anything else on it. So so it was really surprising to me that, and it always surprises me when I ask people to do things that are kind of out of the ordinary of
Mhm,
what they're used to in a worship service, how welcoming
mhm,
it is to them, how people are really respond to it because they feel like they're being invited to participate with their
mhm.
whole self rather than just taking other stuff in.
Yeah. So I think we're almost to 1 o'clock Eastern, noon Central, and who knows what time it is for Sue. She knows,
6 o'clock,
but
at 6 o'clock
Okay,
here.
there you go. There you go. So,
I'm gonna go make dinner.
yeah.
I have
So,
a closing blessing.
thank you.
Um, may God bless you with discomfort, at easy answers, half truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger and injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in the world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all our children and the poor.
Thank you. So we should all go out and be foolish.
And you can take God out of there and put whatever words you want in.
All right.
Okay, we'll see.